Jimmy Hyams, the one, the only. He's a Hall of Famer, and any possible Hall of Fame you can name. As a matter of fact, I sent bios. Caleb, you owe me a bio. I need bios for the website, and Jimmy's, man, pretty darn strong, like 5-time sports writer of the year. And he is fantastic. You know him well, formerly of the Sports Animal. He is retired, but nice enough to join us on Wednesdays. Jimmy, how are you, sir?
Dave, I'm doing great. Caleb, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How's it going, Jimmy?
Good.
Let's get started with your column, because it seems like the common notion was, and maybe we got this from coaches, it takes 4 or 5 years to rebuild a program. You're not going to be able to do it in 2 or 3 years. Now, I know that NIL and the transfer portal has changed that, but really, historically, that hasn't necessarily been the case if you've got the right coach.
That's exactly right, because I went back to look at what Josh Heupel has done. I think what Josh Heupel has done is one of the great turnarounds we've seen in college football over the last 25 years. And that factors in the fact that over 40 players left the program between Pruitt's last season and then Heupel taking over. So you had that attrition. You also had self-imposed 12 scholarships. But for him to take a bunch of guys that were not thought to be that good, cast-offs from a variety of schools, players that were very unproductive at Tennessee, like Cedric Tillman had 8 catches in 3 years, and for him to do what he did with that group and then to win 11 games the next year was phenomenal. But we saw Steve Spurrier go to Florida, and they were not very good when he got there, and he won. He actually had the best record in the SEC his first year there, and then I think he won like 19 games his first 2 seasons. We've seen a lot of coaches. Nick Saban did it 2 places. He did it at LSU, which was horrible when he got there, and he won the SEC in year 2, and then he did it when he got to Alabama. So we have seen a lot of turnarounds. Even Terry Bowden took over an Auburn program. They had consecutive 5-win seasons, and Bowden's first year he goes 11-0, and they're on NCAA probation. So we've seen quick turnarounds, but I think what Heupel has done under the circumstances would match just about any turnaround we've seen over the last 25 or 30 years.
Jimmy, I'm with you on that. I've actually been a very big proponent of you pretty much know whether or not a coach is going to work out by year 2.
Mm-hmm.
If everything I've seen of any successful coach, they've had one successful year by year 2. Where I want to ask a little bit of concern is that I have seen the other way happen though, where coaches make a big splash their first year and then never replicate it. The 2 that come to mind are Kevin Sumlin in 2012, coming in, going 11-2, Heisman winner, and Johnny Manziel, and then Gus Malzahn in 2013. He took over a 3-win Auburn team and won the SEC the next year with Nick Marshall. How can we be sure that Josh Heupel is not in danger of going down the route of Malzahn or Sumlin, as opposed to Spurrier?
I'd even throw in Gene Chizik. It might have been year 2, but he won a national championship, and then he got fired not long after that. So here's the big difference. Josh Heupel's smarter than any of those 3 we've talked about. He just is. He is smarter than they are. He's got an offense that works. It worked at when he was at previous stops. It worked at Missouri. He got there at Missouri. They had an awful offense, one of the worst in the SEC. And then they were among the SEC leaders the next 2 years. It worked at Central Florida. It's worked at Tennessee. People doubted whether or not his system would take fire here. And he did it with a Virginia Tech cast-off at quarterback. He did it with a lot of people that were not that highly rated. I mentioned Cedric Tillman had 8 catches in 3 years. He turns into an all-SEC player. I think his offense is really good, and I think that he is smart enough to where you might say, well, defenses eventually will catch up to that offense. I think Heupel's smart enough to stay a step ahead of that. Now, and also in mentioning those, you mentioned Kevin Sumlin. He had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. Gene Chizik had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. So they certainly had an advantage with great play from that quarterback position, at least in 2 of those examples.
Jimmy, the thing that I look at as far as building a championship program, I'm talking about knocking on the door of, the top 4 or 5 programs in the nation each and every year. I would have said, just actually before the past couple of weeks, I would have said I still want to see more in recruiting. I would argue that Jordan Ross, an edge rusher that everybody wanted, a 5-star guy, is a sign that the recruiting could get really, really good because with Mike Matthews, he's a receiver. Why wouldn't he want to play at Tennessee? And also the fact that they got Bennett Warren, a 4-star offensive lineman out of Texas. When I look at the recruiting end of it, I tend to do that. Those are big guy gets, the type of gets that Kirby Smart, when he went to Georgia, said you got to get those guys, and Tennessee's getting them.
Yeah, they are. And here's my theory on that. I may have shared this with you before, but I think Heupel can take average to above average talent on offense, and he's gonna score points. Defensively, you got to have studs. You got to have really good players on defense. In particular, when you put your defense in harm's way, like Tennessee's system does. So he has gone out and recruited some really good defensive players. He brought in some in this class. It includes Herring, it includes Carter. There's several others that they brought in, some really good edge rushers. And so going forward in 2024, he's got some really good defensive players coming in. I think that is the winning edge. It's going to put him in position to, I don't know about win the SEC, but at least contend and perhaps be in an SEC championship game. And as we know, getting in an SEC championship game now will be harder than ever because you're going to take the 2 best teams. It's not winning the East or West division. They're doing away with that. You got to be one of the 2 best teams in the league to get in the SEC championship. And every year it seems like Georgia and Alabama is going to have something to say about that. But getting back to your question about recruiting, if you go out and get enough studs on defense, which I think they're doing, then I think that puts him in position to be a consistent top 10 program.
How quickly would Tennessee be at a championship level if you still had a Goff or Donnan at Georgia? You had a Brad Scott at South Carolina, and you had a Mike Shula at Alabama. I mean, it's tougher than it was in Philip Fulmer's day. I mean, yeah, I think Tennessee would be right there in terms of winning the SEC if that were the coaching lineup.
It would expedite the process, wouldn't it? Because then you're worried about Alabama and you're worried about LSU. And so that would be your 2 main contenders. If Florida, depending on what coach you had, because you had Spurrier and Urban Meyer, they were pretty darn good at that time. But I think Florida, though, they're just not very good right now. Will they get it back with Napier? I don't know. He might be a stopgap coach. But yeah, if you had those guys at Georgia, that would make it a whole lot easier for Tennessee. No question.
We refer to Ray Goff a lot of times as drunken Ray Goff because Jeff Coleman on our Celebrate 98 series said he showed up to recruit him at his house hammered. So sometimes we'll refer to him as drunken Ray Goff just in case.
I thought that was Mercedes Hamilton who said that.
It was Mercedes that said that. I'm sorry, I got the wrong guy. But he was intoxicated.